Hi everybody. Today we are in the third week of Advent, the Thursday of the third week of Advent, and our text today is taken from Matthew chapter 1 verses 1 to 17. We enter now the last lap of the Advent season, and the spotlight shifts from the parousia to the birth of Jesus. For the next 9 days we will hear parts of the infancy narrative from the Gospels of Matthew and Luke, the only two Gospels that record the narrative surrounding the birth of Jesus Christ. Today's readings look unsparingly at Jesus' ancestry. It's called the Genealogy. Matthew, writing in a Jewish environment, begins his Gospel of Jesus by tracing the ancestry of Jesus back to the patriarchs. What Matthew is trying to do is place Jesus' birth within the context of Jewish history, from the time of Abraham up to the birth of Jesus. Genealogies in Scripture always point in some way to the Lord and the Lord's choice. Look at this list as a starcast and credits of those involved in this great production. And yet, there are surprises in this list of Jesus' ancestors. This genealogy spans the whole history of salvation, from Abraham through David, in 6 groups of 7 names, or 3 groups of 14 names, multiples of 7, 7 being the perfect number for the Hebrews. The first 14 names mentioned are those of the patriarchs, people such as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The second 14 are Israel's kings, especially King David and Solomon. And the last 14 are unknowns from Israel's past, who played a vital role in the coming of the Messiah. This gospel weaves a thread of the long history that eventually brings us to Jesus. Yet, when you look closely at this list, especially of David's descendants, all but 3 were total disappointments, many of them worshipping false gods. The 3 that were considered adequate was Jehoshaphat, Hezekiah, and Josiah. Jesus' family tree is a mix of holy and unholy figures, public sinners and outcasts. Jesus' forebearers included children born of incest like Perez, of mixed races like Boaz, and of an adulterer, Solomon. Some are promiscuous, some are liars, some bullies, while others are thieves. While Rahab made the Faith Hall of Fame in Hebrews chapter 11 verse 31, she's named a prostitute, and Ruth seduced Boaz to secure her future, as we read in Ruth chapter 3 verse 9 to 10. Solomon also had 700 wives and 300 concubines who turned him to apostasy or the worship of other gods, as we read in 1 Kings chapter 11 verses 1 to 8. On the other hand, David came to fame by comforting Saul with a lyre and slaying Goliath with a sling stone. On the other hand, as we read in 2 Samuel chapter 11 verse 17, he killed Uriah, an innocent soldier fighting to protect his empire, so that he could cover up a baby conceived through his philandering with Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah. That baby would eventually die. Matthew's genealogy is revolutionary for his time in that it features women. In addition, 4 of the women were Gentiles: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, and Bathsheba. The first 3 women were not Israelites, and Bathsheba was not married to an Israelite. The irregular marriages of the women may well have prepared Matthew's readers for the extraordinary way in which Jesus himself was conceived. Matthew points out that God entered into our human history with all the episodes that proud people would be ashamed of. The list contains saints and sinners, honest and corrupt, reflecting God's gracious choices. Yet, each played an important role and no one's life was insignificant to God's plan. Jesus does own his family story. He does not airbrush out any one of his ancestors. God could work through all kinds of people. It tells us that Jesus was fully inserted into the human history and human story with its gifts and failures. Seeing that, why would we be surprised at Jesus' choice of disciples or that he was at home with tax collectors and sinners? The genealogy reveals God's providence. What he plans happens always. He is looking after us, all of us, most carefully, and we can feel safe in his hands. Today we enter the first of the 9 days before we celebrate Christmas. Make this your novena to Jesus. As you listen each day to these reflections, let them touch your heart. But most of all, as I always say, have you been an evangelist? Have you shared this good news with your friends? If you haven't, what are you waiting for?